Tottenham Hotspur 1, Manchester United 0 has just ended. Hello, everyone. Mark Donaldson alongside Janusz Michallik. Spurs up to 12th. Manchester United, Janusz now in 15th with only West Ham United and Wolves between them and Ipswich in the relegation zone. First of all, before we get into the game, was the way that this game took place and what happened, what you expected from a game between two sides lacking in confidence?
Yeah, I mean, you have to start with that, first and foremost, these are two massive clubs by name only these days. And we have to accept that fact. And, we always hope for something bigger, but given the situation of the clubs, it almost felt like this game didn't matter. When I started watching, it didn't really matter. It only mattered to their supporters, right? And normally it's a massive game because it has implications in the standings for the clubs themselves, right? They're fighting for the top four, top five, maybe even for the title. But right now, I think in the big picture, with La Liga playing, Bundesliga playing, all the big leagues, you normally look at the schedule and says, wow, this is the game. We got to watch it. I certainly don't think that anybody made this an appointment viewing. But, to be fair, I mean, just looking at that game, sometimes two bad teams, come up with an entertaining game. I'm not going to say great game, but it was entertaining to a point because neither team has a really good structure right now on both sides of the ball. So it was fairly open and, some chances there. And actually, it was better than I thought it would be.
3 points and a clean sheet for Spurs, which will be just as important. And with Vicario back and starting to get other injured players back into the side. Against the Manchester United side today that had to name 7 or 8 academy graduates on the bench, with only Victor Lindelof having played in the Premier League due to illness and injury. It's a pretty damning statement, you said, that this is a game that only really matters to the two sides. But I think you're right. And I don't think many people can argue with that. So how did we get to where we are now, especially Manchester United? Because I don't want this to be a kick them both, because Spurs have won and they deserve the praise for the 3 points. But how are we here?
Yeah, I mean, a number of changes. I don't want to spend the precious time that we have about the Glazers and all that, and the decline and of their interests and how the club has been run, how many managers have been there, how things have gone worse off the pitch, even though Sir Ratcliffe has come on, but we see now redundancies, right? So that's not a great signal, as it is. So it is a long story. For Spurs, I suppose, because both sides have injuries, but I think injuries play a big part, because I have more faith in Spurs than I have in United, right? This season, they're a much, much better team and a squad. And, you mentioned Vicario. I know that you didn't mean it that way, but he provided boost and stability immediately. Yeah, sure. Immediately coming on, right? I mean, even when it was 0-0, remember in that 10th minute double save, I think it was Højlund and Garnacho. Then later on again, Højlund and Garnacho, and a couple other saves that were quality, of course, that we expect. So when you look at some of the big names, even somebody like James Maddison, came back and scored a goal. Fair play to him, right? Because pressure was on him. He didn't have a good season aside from the injuries to a degree. So they do have players that they've recovered already. They're on the bench. There's going to be more quality players coming back. And if I look at the future, Mark, to come back to your original question, I see Spurs future much better than United, because the season is over. And by the way, the young bench, why didn't we see any substitution? Because I'm not going to mention Obi coming in the whatever it was, 91st minute. Yep. I thought Ruben Amorim was great with young players at Sporting. He did a great job. Why not giving them a chance today in that second half? Explain that to me, to not to make changes, because this is the future. Manchester United is not going to have any players other than what he has right now. Maybe one or two, certainly not the big names. Give them a chance already. You're playing for absolutely nothing. Well, maybe we'll get to Europa League, because both sides kind of.
Yeah, look, in defense of Manchester United, because it'd be easy to kick them while they're down, and they're in 15th right now, and the whole thing's a mess, and they're underachieving. They have given youth a chance. Mainu's played, Garnacho's played, and I get what you're saying. Look, they did have a lot of injuries, and they did have a lot of illness, but when I look at, there was one chance in particular, and I thought it was a really good move, and Bruno Fernandes was involved. It was in the first half, and we'll get to the Spurs goal in just a second. Fernandes has played a brilliant ball through for Garnacho, and is it just because speak to me as a footballer, Janusz, is it just because you're lacking in confidence that he's done what he's done? Because I've seen him do that, not with his eyes closed, but not even think about it, put it in the back of the net, run away and celebrate, but he balloons it over.
The one over the bar.
Man United's best chance.
Yeah, lack of confidence when a whole team is playing like it is. There's that extra pressure that you put on yourself. Obviously, I think if you look at Garnacho, there's been so much talk about is he good enough? Maybe the whole environment is not good for anyone to thrive. That's the issue. When you look at Ruben Amorim. First and foremost, let me tell you right away, that I hope that he stays and I hope he gets an opportunity. But Ruben Amorim right now has delivered absolutely nothing, zero. And we can sit here and talk about what happened to Manchester United. There's always a time in a season where your ideas have got to come across, and he's been there long enough. And just like everyone's saying, defensively on the attack, you don't see identity. The way that he likes to play, okay, he's stubborn. He's not changing anything. That doesn't seem to work. But I see worse teams in that league that from time to time impress. And this Manchester United team doesn't do that at all in any of the games that we see so far. What has he got? 4 wins, since he's been there. It's absolutely, So look, I had to chuckle a little bit during the commentary. They said the bookies in England have Manchester United and Tottenham as favorites to win the Europa League. Are you kidding me? Okay, I suppose with Spurs, if everybody's back, never say never, but come on.
Like that. Knowing the way that works, that's just weight of money. It's local teams or teams in England with English bookmakers. I understand that. Whether they deserve to be favourites, no, they don't. But look, this is about Spurs today. They won by 1-0, and it's only their second clean sheet in the Premier League at home since October 2023. The last time they did so, Janusz, was their first home game of the season against Everton by 4-0. And I mentioned Vicario. And when they get their players back, it's not a season to write off yet because they're still in the Europa League. So what happens between now and the end of the season? Because I was pleased for Ange Postecoglou. I like him. I think he's a breath of fresh air. Don't always agree with what he says, but he can be prickly. I think he's a good addition to the Premier League. And if he was going to go, he would have probably gone and been sacked after the Leicester game. So now about Spurs. It's about looking up and how do they keep this momentum going? Clean sheet, 3 points, job done.
Yeah, I think they can out of the two for the most part, right? Because, you could make, all the statements that I'm making, you could make about both. That's where we are with, they are before the game, right next to each other pretty much at the wrong end of the table. But I think, there is hope for them with players. But I just think right now, as much as, for example, I look at Manchester United and I say to myself, well, it's not like they're magically going to put on a 3, 4, 5 game winning streak. It's just not going to happen. They themselves, Manchester United, that is missing players. But for Spurs, I always felt that there's hope. I always felt that, last year when he came in and started so well, and then the injuries started to happen, right? And they kind of, they're bleeding into this season as well. So that is first and foremost something that he has to consider, right? They have to sit down and figure out why under him there's so many injuries. I was listening to Gary Neville ahead of the game. I don't know if you caught that, but it's a statistic that I often dismiss. I'm not big into that, but there are times where you have to think about it, right? I think the second in sprints, 4,000 plus ahead of this game. I forget who the first team was, but obviously they've had a lot of injuries, a lot of hamstring injuries. That's not just Spurs, that's everybody in this league. Part of it is, of course, the number of games being played and all of that. But he has to figure this out, right? Because we're talking about 2 seasons now greatly affected by major injuries. So if they don't address that, Mark, then that's going to continue to happen. There's something bigger to that and something to it. He has quality. He likes to entertain. He likes to attack. I like that, right? But, structure, that's what I mean. 2 ways of playing the games. Even today, Mark, did you not get an impression that the game was so wide open And Manchester United did have their chances. I'm saying to myself, okay, you're at home. It's 1-0. You've talked about the lack of clean sheets. At some stage in the last 20, 25 minutes, you would have thought, how do we manage the game? Because that's what you're asking me. Can Ange learn at least and be humble enough to say, we've got to manage games when we're in the lead? Yes, we're looking okay, but now is the time to maybe sit back just a little bit, possession, all that stuff. That to me is important in terms of how long Ange Postecoglou is going to stay in charge of this team.
Look, they're up against Manchester United today. They're not up against the best team in Europe, and they didn't have to be at their best to get all 3 points. They were decent enough, but it's a Manchester United side that, again, I want to revisit this for one final time, but with this question: are Manchester United in a better position at all with Ruben Amorim in charge than they were if they'd kept Erik ten Hag?
No, they're not. We haven't seen that yet. As I've said, he delivered absolutely nothing so far. I mean, total disappointment in a difficult situation, because I think that continues, right? I mean, the previous managers, they weren't successful, and then all of a sudden, Amorim comes back, and the thought was, just because he's done great stuff at Sporting, he's going to do it here. And by the way, look at Sporting since he left. That's been a disaster. So the man clearly, knows his football, I think. So I'd like him to stay, because, the changing of the managers have got to stop somewhere. But I just think that there's got to be a turn in mentality, because, as I've said, I don't suspect, even though, there's always money at United in terms of contracts, but I think you'd be hard pressed to see any significant players of name coming to Manchester United in the near future. So I'd like to think from now on for the rest of the season, some of the youngsters they saw on the bench, be bold right now, because nothing's going to change. As I said, you're not going to see Manchester United coming up with wins just like that out of nowhere. There's no indication of that, Mark. So start the rebuild now. Both Spurs and Manchester United in particular right now, all I'd be thinking about is, okay, the next season starts right now. Give the young players opportunity, and the scouting network better be all over the place looking for young players, maybe players that others aren't looking, recognizing talent and rebuild for next 2 or 3 seasons.
It's funny when you think about it, though, and you talk about, despite the fact it's Manchester United, are players going to come there? Can they afford players? But both of these sides could be playing Champions League next season. If the bookies are right, and you wouldn't be getting money from a lot of people, but as you said, but this is the reward. They're both the favourites here. You've got Lazio, you've got Athletic Club as well, who I would take both of them over Man United and Spurs. But if Man United and Spurs somehow win the Europa League, they're in the Champions League. So
there is that carrot.
There
is that carrot. Never say never. I think that would open up to some players thinking about United. But I don't know. Part of me thinks that the way they are, at least United, more so United than Spurs. You get in the Champions League, that would be even the worst thing, because the pressure would be immediate. They'd forget about the rebuild, because they'd say, well, now we got to play in these 2 massive competitions that are Champions League. I don't want to say, it's a bad thing to go in a Champions League, but I hope you understand what I mean.
Financially, it's a good thing, but the way that they are right now, they're not going to win many games.
And unless you think that just because, say, United got to the Champions League, all of a sudden that opens up an avenue to those players that normally at this point United can't compete for. Maybe.
12 losses in the first 25 Premier League games. That's never happened to Manchester United in the top flight before in the club's history. And is it a surprise? Not really. Did many people care today outside of Spurs and Man United fans, going back to their point? Well, not really. It was a battle for 12th place. But Spurs are on the way up. They've got players to come back, and that's a good win for them today and a good clean sheet. For Manchester United, at least they've got the Europa League. Bye for now.